Thank you. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the way we schedule the activities in our life. Tamar Avnet and I have been doing some research for several years now and found that the way we schedule our activities have a deep influence over how much control we feel over our life as well as our happiness. And I'd like to share those insights with you. So, there are two ways that humans in the world use to schedule their activities currently. And to give you a sense of these ways, I'm going to introduce you to two people, Anna and George, as they plan their typical Saturday. Anna wakes up, has breakfast. From 10 to 12, she shops for groceries at the supermarket. From 12 to 2, she has lunch with her best friend. From 2 to 4, she'll shop for kids' clothes. And from 4 to 5, we'll get art supplies. At 5 o'clock, Anna heads home for the weekend. George views his day a little differently. After waking up and having breakfast, George, when he feels ready, will go to the supermarket to get groceries. When he feels he has enough groceries to survive for the week, he will proceed to having lunch with his friend. When he's done with that as well, he'll get kids' clothes. When he's done with that as well, he'll get art supplies. And once he can call it a day, he'll head home. The actual time of day that George will be back home may be earlier or later than Anna's. Right? The thing is here, while Anna relies on the clock to schedule her activities, George relies on his internal sense that it is an appropriate time to move from one activity to the next. Now, we all know Anna's and George's, right? They are fascinating animals. Of course, these are extreme illustrations of each scheduling style. Anna's style I will refer to as clock time, and George's style I will refer to as even time. Most of us do not entirely rely on one style or another, but rather on a combination of both styles, right? And so I will refer to people who predominantly use clock time as clock timers, and people who predominantly use even time as even timers. Now, of course, clock timers haven't always been around, right? A few thousand years ago, humans primarily relied on even time, right? Aside from the sun rising and setting and the passing of seasons, humans did not have any way to track time precisely. Now that's changed once the first version of a clock became available, about 3,000 years to 1,500 years before the current era. And since then, the popularity of the clock increased in leaps throughout history, right? It was associated with massive gains in efficiency, and it culminated with Taylorism. Right? And the idea, the belief that in order to achieve maximal performance on a task, you should define how much time should be spent on it optimally. Right? Since then, we've had decades of economics research that have been advocating clock time as the best way to schedule activities in our modern societies. Now, the problem, though, with that is that if you look at humans today, most humans on Earth today still function in even time. Yeah? The ones who function in clock time are in industrialized societies. And in these societies, clocks are everywhere, right? They hang over workers in factories, they hang over creative people inside of companies who need to deliver according to an externally dictated schedule. They hang over CEOs who need to navigate an increasingly complex environment and deliver results on a quarterly or an annual basis. They hang over country leaders who need to get re-elected. Also, our educational system rewards people who follow clock time, not even time. If you look at selection exams, such as the GMAT, you're not only asked to do well, you're asked to do well under time pressure. For instance, you have 3.5 hours to complete the GMAT, right? So that means that your score on such tasks defines whether or not you will have access to the leading academic institutions around the world. So we thought it's interesting because we're in a world where clock timers and even timers coexist. So let's look at how adopting each of these scheduling styles affects how we feel about the world, how we think, and how we behave. So to get at that, let's look at how each clock timers and even timers, each of these individuals views their schedule. So focusing on clock timers, you can see that they slice time into quantifiable, independent units that they use to fit their activities into. And it's great to function like that because the time units being independent, you can freely rearrange them over time, right? So for instance, if as a clock timer, I know that I take 2 hours to shop for groceries and 2 hours to shop for kids' clothes, I can go to the supermarket in the morning and shop for kids' clothes in the afternoon, or do the reverse, right? In other words, I arrange my activities a bit like I arrange flowers in a bouquet. I pick 2 flowers, I can swap them, and nothing happens to the rest of the bouquet. And this arrangement of activities has provided a huge advantage to clock timers. They can be flexible in scheduling and rescheduling activities as much as they want. Now, it also comes with 2 implications, though. Because the time units are independent, it means that they are not correlated, let alone causally related, right? So my going to lunch with my friend does not cause me to go to the supermarket afterwards, right? The second implication is that when you rely on the clock, you put control of your schedule outside of yourself. And we know from psychology that when people do that, they tend to believe that things happen in the world as a result of fate, chance, and powerful others more. Now, if you look at even timers, we're looking at a very different animal. Remember George, who will go to the supermarket. Conditional on that being done, he'll have lunch with his friend. Conditional on that being done, he'll shop for kids' clothes. Conditional on that being done, he'll get art supplies and then go home once he's done with the art supplies, right? To George, events are interdependent, right? They look more like a necklace. If you need to move one of the events, you need to move a whole string of events with it, just like if you want to move a pearl, you need to move the other pearls with it, right? Now, the other thing about George is he controls internally his schedule. And that means that it's likely to be associated with a bigger belief, a greater belief, that things happen in the environment, due to your own doing more. All right, so because of these differences in scheduling between clock timers and even timers, we found actually that clock timers recognize causality in the world at large significantly less than even timers. That can sound weird, but we find it consistently and repeatedly whatever pair of events we take. Let me give you an example. François Hollande becomes president of France, and Gérard Depardieu becomes Russian. These are causally related events, objectively. What's remarkable is, independent of that objective causality, if you ask clock timers and even timers to estimate the degree of causality between these 2 events, we consistently find that clock timers will give a significantly lesser estimate compared than event timers. They recognize causality less. Now, this is very important, because it means that since our event-time ancestors were left behind and we increasingly relied on the clock to schedule our activities, we also began to perceive the world as a more and more disconnected place, a more and more random place, a more and more chaotic place. Clock timers believe the world is more chaotic than event timers. Now, if you think that's bad, there's actually worse. We know that when people locate control externally rather than internally, it tends to make them feel less happy. So we wondered, are clock timers less happy than event timers? Well, if you think about it, event timers rely on their emotions. They are very attuned to their emotions because they rely on that all the time to decide when to move from one activity to the next, right? Clock timers, on the other hand, they don't need to be attuned to their emotions because they surrender to the clock. The problem is, psychologists now know that in order to be happy, we need to be attuned to our emotions, and particularly, we need to be able to savor positive emotions. Okay, that is a critical antecedent of happiness. And what we find is that clock timers are less able than event timers to savor positive experiences. Let me give you an example. Imagine you go on a hike with some friends, and at some point of the hike, you get to this view. Okay, look at it. Oh. For most of us, seeing such magnificent nature provokes a very strong, positive emotional experience that we are motivated to make linger for as long as possible, right? And we have a number of ways that we use to make it linger. One way is to just immerse ourselves in the moment by inhaling the view. Another way is displaying the emotions by going like, oh, this is beautiful, right? Or even by crying. A third way is to share our experience with the others who are with us on the hike. And a last way is to share it with others days later when we recommend the hike to others and relive the experience and savor it again. Right? So what we find is that clock timers in a situation like this are unable to savor the awe of the moment as much as clock timers. Right? Actually, we find that holds for all across the spectrum of positive emotions. We find it with joy, excitement, pride, gratitude, and other emotions as well. All across this spectrum, we find that clock timers immerse themselves less in the moment, they display their emotions less, and they share their emotions less with others on the spur of the moment or later. They savor less. Okay? Now, what does that mean? That means that if you're an event timer, you see the picture like this. If you're a clock timer, you see the picture like this and quickly like that. And an event timer manages to maintain it like that for longer. All right, we also tried to mess around a little bit with the schedule of clock timers and event timers and see how they would react if we started throwing amazing opportunities at them out of the blue, opportunities that would be there one day, gone the next. Okay? Now, imagine it's Tuesday morning, you're at work, okay? And you have a few things you need to do this week, and a very good friend of yours calls you. You know they were supposed to go to this place with someone, right? But they tell you that actually that someone cancelled on them last minute and that they offer you to go now for free. But you need to decide by the end of today. Now, what do? Yeah? So you know you have a few days of holidays due from work. You have to replan your schedule. That's the one cost you have, right? So what we find is that clock timers are significantly, again, less likely to seize an opportunity like that compared to event timers. 2 reasons for that. They savor imagining the free vacation less. Yeah? And then they need more time to rearrange all their schedule. In contrast, event timers are able to savor the full-blown awesomeness of a free vacation, yeah, fully. And in order to reschedule their activities, well, they take the string of it and they just postpone it, which takes no time. So relying on the clock decreases your chance of seizing exploding opportunities. Very sad. Now, there's one last thing that I'd like to talk about, which is, does relying on the clock versus our own sense impact our performance, right? And so Tamara and I were reasoning that if you have clock timers who, on the one hand, believe that chance and fate and powerful others control the world more, and at the same time they can savor less the moment, then they should suck at any task where being in the moment is critical and having high personal control is critical. And so we searched for such an activity and settled on hot yoga. Hot yoga, otherwise known as Bikram, is a very intense physical practice. It's 90 minutes, during which you have to hold 26 poses that are pretty difficult. This is one of them. You need to repeat each pose twice. Okay? It requires control. In addition, you're doing this in insufferable heat. It's 40 degrees Celsius in the room throughout the practice, which is 104 degrees Fahrenheit. This requires you to get your focus on the moment, which you get to through meditation. Right? So you need to manage to get to meditation and maintain that meditative state throughout the 26 poses. Very hard. So I took advantage of a class with the HEC entrepreneurs here that I do. As part of which I have the entrepreneur do a full session, but unbeknownst to them, I changed the studio depending on the group who came in. Okay? I had 4 groups. For 2 of the groups, I just put a clock on the wall. So they could rely on the clock if they wanted to during their yoga session. Yeah? For the other 2 groups, I covered the clock in black and white stripes, so they had no way of relying on time during their yoga session. Yeah? And so the idea was to compare these 2 groups with the clock or without the clock. So first of all, the groups who had the clock, in those groups, not everybody noticed the clock, but those who did notice the clock kept going back to it desperately during the session to track their performance. What did we find? We found that people who relied on the clock versus not attributed their performance to the instructor more. So they did a good yoga, it was because of the instructor. They did bad yoga, it was still because of the instructor. Okay? They also felt significantly less inspired, inspiration being the goal of meditation, the very essence of yoga. They found it harder to reach and maintain that state. And finally, and more importantly, they literally sat down more often. They gave up on the task entirely more often and skipped more of the 26 poses as a result. What's important to remember here also is that we got this result just with the presence of a clock in the room, that is independently of whether students were in general clock timers or in general event timers. Just contextually reminding people of the clock was enough to hurt their performance. So, the clock can make us perform more poorly, right? So obviously, if you think of Taylorism, the clock has been great for standardized tasks. Our insight is to claim that it can be counterproductive when focusing on non-standardized tasks for which you need tremendous control and tremendous ability to be in the moment, such as the GMAT or the job of a CEO in today's business environment. Why do we think that these insights are important? Well, in 2010, IBM published a very important poll of over 1,500 CEOs worldwide. Now, do you think that most CEOs are clock timers or event timers? What do you say? Mostly clock timers, right? Presumably. Well, over 60% of the CEOs interviewed claim that they perceive today's environment as being increasingly turbulent and more random and more chaotic than ever before. Sounds familiar? The other thing that we learned from this poll is that these CEOs claim that the key leadership quality to survive in this environment is creativity, the capacity, the ability to come up with new ways of solving tough problems. Right? And they noticed that companies that do better than others at navigating this environment are also companies who grasp exploding opportunities more. Oh well. Right? And there are also companies who give up the clock altogether, right? So for instance, instead of revising their strategy annually, they decide to switch to a system where you continuously revise your strategy instead. So the clock has been a pillar of an economic system that we put in place to serve the Industrial Revolution. It has provided us with an unprecedented level of efficiency in human history, right? The top of human coordination was attained through this invention and installation in our lives, right? The problem is, if there's one thing we know today, it is that this economic model is obsolete, and that if we want to reinvent our economy, we're going to need a shift in paradigm, right? In order to address issues such as sustainability in a world of soon 9 billion people. Right? So if we need to reinvent our economic system, it is our belief that we also need to question the pervasiveness of the clock in our lives in industrialized societies. Right. Our research suggests that if clock time serves standardized tasks very well, it may not be the most productive way of producing breakthrough creative output. So maybe it is time to transform our universities and transform our companies to allow more event timers to enter, take control, and thrive. Thank you.